You are lying flat on your back. It's the middle of the night. Your spine is straight, your arms are out, your mouth is open, and you are completely, gloriously unconscious. This is normal. This is what sleep looks like. This is what every mattress ad, every hotel, every pillow with a 47-step memory foam patent has trained you to believe is the one correct way for a human body to power down. Now I want you to imagine telling that to someone from 400 years ago. They would look at you like you'd lost your mind. Because for an enormous chunk of human history, lying down flat to sleep, the thing you do every single night without a second thought, was not the default. It wasn't even necessarily the goal. A staggering number of our ancestors slept propped up, half sitting, reclined against bolsters, wedged into short wooden boxes, leaning back at an angle that would absolutely wreck your neck today. And the deeper you dig into this, the stranger it gets. Because the question stops being, how did they sleep, and becomes something much weirder. Why would a human being choose to sleep sitting up? That's the story today. Not a myth, not a fun fact you half remember from somewhere. A genuine, documented, slowly unraveling historical mystery about the single most ordinary thing you will do tonight. And by the end of this, I promise you are going to look at your own bed differently. Let's start with the thing nobody tells you about beds. The flat, horizontal, lie down and sprawl bed that you own, that's new. That's a modern luxury. For most of human history, the bed was not a guaranteed object. It was a pile of straw, a mat on a dirt floor, a shared platform, a bench, a corner. And in a shocking number of those situations, lying fully flat was either uncomfortable, dangerous, or just not how it was done. Here's where it gets interesting. Walk into a museum that's preserved a genuine medieval or early modern European home, and one of the first things that confuses people is the beds. They're short. Disturbingly short. Tourists look at them and go, wow, people back then were tiny. And that explanation gets repeated everywhere. People were just smaller. Case closed. Except, no, people in the medieval period were not that small. Skeletal evidence shows the average height wasn't dramatically different from ours. A medieval adult would not fit into one of those beds lying flat any more than you would. So if the people weren't tiny, why were the beds so short? One answer, argued by historians who study this stuff seriously, is almost absurdly simple. The beds were short because people weren't lying down flat in them. They were sleeping propped up, half sitting, leaning back against a mound of pillows and bolsters, their torso raised, their body folded into a shape that fit a shorter frame just fine. Let that sink in. The bed wasn't built wrong. We've just been reading it wrong for centuries. Now, I want to be honest with you, because this is exactly the kind of fun history fact that gets exaggerated online, and I'm not going to do that to you. There are historians who push back on the short bed theory. Some argue the beds look short because of how the bedding was stacked, or because of measurement quirks, or because mattresses extended further than the visible frame. This is a debate, not a settled law of physics. But here's what's not in dispute, and this is the part that matters. The semi-upright sleeping position was real, widespread, documented, and it lasted for a very long time. In wealthy European households from roughly the 1500s through the 1700s, you find bed after bed designed around a mountain of pillows. The whole architecture of a fancy bed assumed your upper body would be elevated. Inventories list bolsters, those long, firm, cylindrical cushions, as essential equipment, not decoration. You'd have a base bolster running the width of the bed, then pillows stacked on top, building a ramp for your back. People slept on an incline, on purpose, night after night. So the question gets sharper. Not did they do it, but why? And this is where the story splits open into about 5 different explanations. And the genuinely fascinating thing is that they might all be true at once. Explanation number 1, breathing and the very real fear of not waking up. Before modern medicine, before antibiotics, before anyone understood germs, respiratory illness was a constant lurking killer. Congestion, fluid on the lungs, chest infections, these things killed people routinely, and they killed them in the night. And anyone who's ever tried to sleep flat with a bad cold knows the feeling. You lie down and suddenly you can't breathe. You cough. You drown a little. You sit up and instantly it eases. People figured this out without needing a study to tell them. Sleeping elevated kept the airways clearer. It made breathing easier. In an era where a chest infection could quietly turn fatal, sleeping propped up wasn't a quirky preference. It was, in a very literal sense, a survival strategy. You went to sleep in a position that gave your lungs a fighting chance. Explanation number 2. The cold, the smoke, and the floor that was trying to kill you. Go back far enough, and the floor is the enemy. Cold seeped up from packed earth and stone. Damp followed the cold. And up near the ceiling, in any home heated by an open fire or a hearth, there was smoke. Thick, drifting, lung-coating smoke. Because chimneys, the good kind, are a relatively recent invention too. So you've got cold and damp pooling low and smoke gathering high, which means the optimal sleeping zone is this narrow band in between, and a raised, semi-upright position let you find it. Off the freezing floor, below the worst of the smoke, tucked into the one livable layer of the room. No central heating, no double glazing. No little app that tells you the bedroom is a crisp 68 degrees. Just you, a fire, a hostile floor, and the eternal human project of not being miserable enough to die. Explanation number 3, and this one I love because it's so human. Status, power, showing off. A grand, towering, pillow-stacked bed was a flex. In the courts of Europe, the bed became a stage. The most famous example is the French monarchy, where the king's bed was practically a throne. Important visitors were received while the king reclined, propped up, half sitting in a bed surrounded by railings, with courtiers standing in attendance. There were elaborate rituals, the lever and the coucher, the formal getting up and going to bed ceremonies, where powerful people watched the king transition between vertical and horizontal like it was theater, because it was. In that world, sleeping bolt upright in a magnificent bed signaled that you were not some peasant collapsing face down into straw. You were dignified. You were elevated, literally and socially. Lying flat was for the dead and the poor. The mighty sat up, even in their sleep. But here's where it gets genuinely strange, because now we have to leave the cozy world of fancy European beds and ask a much bigger question. Was the upright sleep thing just a European fashion? A quirk of a few damp centuries? No. And this is the part that makes you realize you might be looking at something deeper than fashion. Because all over the world, in cultures with no contact with each other, you find people who do not sleep the way you sleep. Look at the lit clos, the box beds of Brittany and other parts of rural France and the Celtic regions. These were enclosed wooden cabinets, almost like cupboards you climbed into and shut behind you. They were short, they were tight, and people slept in them folded, semi-reclined, sometimes nearly sitting, partly for warmth, partly for protection from drafts and animals, partly because that's how the box was built. Whole families used them. Generations grew up, never once sleeping flat on their backs in an open room. Look at cultures across Asia and Africa, where the headrest, not the pillow, was the sleeping tool of choice. In ancient Egypt, people used carved wooden or stone headrests, curved supports that cradled the neck and held the head up off the ground. The Egyptians weren't lying flat with a soft, fluffy pillow. They were keeping the head elevated, the neck supported, the body in a very different shape than a modern sleeper. And you find headrests like this across the African continent and into the Pacific, used for centuries, sometimes specifically to keep an elaborate hairstyle intact, sometimes for airflow and coolness, sometimes for reasons we're still piecing together. The point is this: the flat sprawl is not universal. It is not the obvious, inevitable, only natural way for a human to sleep. It's one option among many, and across thousands of years and dozens of cultures, an enormous number of humans picked something more upright. So now we have to go even further back, past the kings, past the box beds, past the headrests. Back to the question that's really driving all of this. What did sleep actually look like for our ancient ancestors? The ones with no beds at all. And to get there, we need to talk about one of the most quietly mind-bending discoveries in the history of sleep research. Because it turns out we've been wrong about more than just the position. We've been wrong about the shape of the night itself. His name is A. Roger Ekirch. He's a historian at Virginia Tech, and in 2005, he published a book called At Day's Close: Night in Times Past. And in it, he dropped a bombshell that he'd uncovered by digging through hundreds of old documents. Diaries, court records, medical texts, poems, prayers. Over and over, across centuries of English language sources, he kept finding the same two phrases: first sleep and second sleep. Not sleep, two sleeps. What Ekirch realized is that for much of pre-industrial history, people did not sleep in one solid 8-hour block. They slept in two. You'd go to bed not long after dark, sleep for a few hours, your first sleep, and then naturally wake up around midnight. And here's the wild part. You didn't panic about it. You didn't lie there doom scrolling and calculating how few hours you had left. Waking in the middle of the night was completely normal. People used that gap. They prayed, they talked, they tended the fire, they had sex, they visited neighbors, they reflected on their dreams while the dreams were fresh, and then, an hour or two later, they drift back down into their second sleep until dawn. Two sleeps, with a calm, wakeful island in between. For most of human history, that was just the night. And then it vanished. As artificial lighting spread, as candles got cheaper, as gas lamps lit up cities, as the electric bulb finally conquered the dark, the night got shorter, and the two-sleep pattern got squeezed out. People stayed up later, compressed their rest into one block, and within a few generations, forgot the whole thing had ever existed. The very phrases first sleep and second sleep dropped out of the language. We didn't just change how we sleep, we forgot we'd ever done it differently. But here's where it gets interesting. Because that's a historian working from documents. What does the actual science say? Is this just an old European habit? Or is segmented sleep something built deeper into us? Enter Thomas Ware, a researcher at the National Institute of Mental Health. In the early 1990s, Ware ran an experiment that sounds almost too simple to be profound. He took a group of people and, for a month, plunged them into long nights. 14 hours of darkness every single night, the way a human in winter, before electric light, would have experienced it. No phones glowing, no lamps, just darkness, the way it used to be. And after a few weeks, their sleep changed. It split. People started sleeping in two distinct chunks, separated by a quiet period of wakefulness in the middle of the night. A calm, almost meditative state, with elevated levels of prolactin, the same hormone associated with that peaceful, dreamy contentment. Where subjects, modern people with modern brains, spontaneously rediscovered the exact pattern Ekirch found buried in centuries-old diaries. Let that sink in. The two-sleep night isn't just a historical curiosity. It might be the pattern your body wants. The one electric light papered over. You've been doing it wrong, possibly your entire life. And so has nearly everyone you know. So if the timing of sleep was that different, if the very structure of the night was something we've forgotten, then suddenly the idea that the position was different too stops sounding crazy. It starts sounding obvious. Of course they didn't sleep like us. They didn't do anything about the night like us. Now let's go all the way back. All the way to the people with no beds, no box beds, no bolsters, no headrests, the hunter-gatherers. In 2015, a team led by Jerome Siegel, a sleep researcher at UCLA, published a study in the journal Current Biology that did something nobody had really done before. They strapped tracking devices onto people in 3 of the few remaining traditional hunter-gatherer and forager societies on Earth: the Hadza in Tanzania, the San in Namibia, and the Chimane in Bolivia. Communities living without electricity, without artificial light, in conditions closer to our deep ancestral past than almost anywhere else. And the findings quietly demolished a few myths. These people didn't sleep more than us. In fact, they often slept a bit less, around 6.5 hours a night. They didn't go to bed when the sun went down. They stayed up hours into the dark, around a fire. They tended to wake near dawn. And crucially, they had almost no concept of insomnia. Some of the languages didn't even have a word for it. But for our story, the detail that matters most is the fire. Because every one of these communities sleeps with fire, near fire, around fire. And anyone who slept near a fire knows you don't sprawl out flat in the smoke. You sit, you lean. You arrange your body to stay warm on one side, watch the flames, keep the smoke out of your face, and stay just alert enough to feed the fire and notice if something moves in the dark. Which brings us to the oldest, deepest, most primal explanation of all. The one underneath the kings and the box beds and the headrests. Safety. For almost the entire span of human existence, sleep was the most dangerous thing you did. Think about it. You're a relatively slow, soft, clawless, fangless animal. And for 8 hours, you're going to switch off your brain and become, biologically speaking, slow meat lying in the open. Predators hunt at night. Rival groups move at night. The dark was full of things that wanted to eat you or kill you, and you were planning to go unconscious right in the middle of it. A flat, deep, dead-to-the-world sleep is a luxury of safety. It's something you can only afford when you're certain nothing is coming. And for most of human history, nobody was certain. So you slept lighter. You slept in groups, in shifts, with someone awake. And you slept in positions you could wake up from fast, propped, leaning, half-sitting, ready. A body that's already partly upright is a body that's a half-second closer to standing, to running, to fighting. Lying flat on your back, limbs splayed, is the position of total surrender. It's the position of an animal that has decided, against all evidence, that the world is safe. There's even research backing the group sleep version of this. A study of the Hadza found that across their sleeping groups, at almost any given moment during the night, somebody was awake. Not on a guard rota, not on purpose, just naturally. Because people of different ages drift in and out of sleep at different times. The older members tended to stir earlier. The younger ones stayed up later. The result is a kind of accidental, around-the-clock sentinel system. There was almost no point in the night when the whole group was unconscious at once. So picture it now. Not a king on his throne bed. Not a French family folded into a wooden cupboard. Go all the way back. A small band of humans, 50,000 years ago, gathered around a fire under an enormous open sky. The flames are low. The cold is pressing in from the dark beyond the firelight. Somewhere out there, something is breathing. And so they sleep the only way that makes sense. Close together, leaning, propped against each other and against the earth. Upright enough to wake in an instant. Never all the way under. Never all the way gone. That is sleep for almost the whole of human history. Light, watchful, communal, sitting up. And the flat, 8-hour, alone in a dark room, dead to the world sleep that you think of as natural, the one the mattress companies sell you as your birthright, that's the strange one. That's the experiment. That's the brand new, historically bizarre thing our species started doing about 5 minutes ago, evolutionarily speaking. Once we built walls thick enough, locks strong enough, and a world tame enough that we could finally, for the first time, afford to fully let go. So tonight, when you climb into your bed, your big, soft, flat, gloriously horizontal bed, in your warm room, behind your locked door, with no fire to tend and no predator in the dark, and no second sleep waiting for you at midnight, I want you to notice it, just for a second. You're about to do something almost none of your ancestors ever could. You're going to lie down completely flat, close your eyes, and trust the dark entirely. It feels like the most natural thing in the world. It might be one of the least natural things we've ever done. And there's a part of this story I haven't told you yet, because the reason we finally lay down, the exact moment our species stopped sleeping upright and started trusting the night, has less to do with comfort than you'd ever guess, and almost everything to do with one invention that changed what darkness even means.